देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं
ततो जयमुदीरयेत्
जयमुदीरयेत्
नष्टप्रायेषु अभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवती उत्तमा श्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्ठिकी. Reading from Bhagavad Gita as it is, chapter 8, attaining the Supreme, text number 26. Shukla Krishne Gati Hi Ete Shukla Krishne Gati Hi Ete Jagataha Shashvate Mate Jagataha Shashvate Mate Ekaya Yati Anavritim Ekaya Yati Anavritim Anyaya Avartate Punaha Anyaya Avartate Punaha Shukla Krishne Gati Ete Jagataha Shashvate Mate Ekaya Yati Anavritim Anyaya Vartate Punaha Shukla Krishne Gati Ete Jagataha Shashvate Mati Ekaya Yati Anavritim Anyaya Vartate Punaha Shukla Krishne Gati Ete Jagataha Shashvate Mate Ekaya Yati Anavritim Anyaya Vartate Punaha
Shukla Krishna Gati Ete
Shukla Krishne Gati Ete Jagataha Shashvate Mate Ekaya Yati Anavritim Anyaya Vartate Punaha.
Shukla Krishna Gati Ete
Shukla Krishne Gati Ete Jagataha Shashvate Mate
Anyaya Vartate Punaha
Anyaya Vartate Punaha. Would you like to chant this? Shukla Krishne Gati Ete Jagataha Shashvate Mate Ekaya Yati Anavritim Anyaya Vartate Punaha. Online? Shukla light. Krishna darkness. Gati passing away. He certainly. Ete all this. Jagataha of the material world. Shasvate Vedas. Mate in my opinion. Ekaya by one. Yati goes. Anavritim no return. Anyaya by the other. Avartate comes back. Punaha again. Translation purport by Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation. According to the Vedas, there are two ways of passing from this world, one in light and one in darkness. When one passes in light, he does not come back, but when one passes in darkness, he returns. Translation with repetition. According to the Vedas, there are two ways of passing from this world, one in light and one in darkness. When one passes in light, he does not come back. But when one passes in darkness, he returns. The same description of departure and return is quoted by Acharya Baladeva Vidyabhushana from the Chandogya Upanishad. In such a way, those who are fruitive laborers and philosophical speculators from time immemorial are constantly going and coming. Actually, they do not attain ultimate salvation, for they do not surrender to Krishna. Thus ends the Transcendental Bhaktivedanta purport. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimade Bhaktivedanta Swami Nitinamine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pasyat Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasati Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Prabhupada. So we are looking at the chapter 8. So we are looking at the chapter 8 of Bhagavad Gita. So Bhagavad Gita has total number of how many chapters? 18. Yes, 18. Have you read the Bhagavad Gita? Oh, very nice. So we are in the last section of the 8th chapter. The title of the 8th chapter is known as, do you know what it is? Yes, Attaining the Supreme. So what is the highest goal that one can attain? That is being described by the Lord here in the 8th chapter. So one of the terms that is mentioned as attaining the Supreme is attaining liberation, moksha. But we will see what it actually means. And the Lord is already has described a few things about what is that supreme goal. So just to summarize where we are in this chapter, so we are in verse number 26. So in the beginning of this chapter, there is various questions that are asked by Arjuna, and then Lord Krishna is answering them. And in the very beginning of verse 2, 3, 4, Lord answers most of the questions. But from there is one question of how does one remember the Lord at the time of death? That is being described by the Lord, and what happens to a person when he is in a certain state of mind at the time of death. So based upon the state of the mentality or the mental state at which one leaves this body, accordingly he achieves different destinations. So it's like let's say I'm in a bus stop and I choose one flight or one bus or the other bus, and accordingly I will go to different destinations. So similarly, here the point of death is the most important thing. So anyone who lives in a certain state of mind will attain specific kinds of body. So the Lord describes the importance of remembering Him only at the time of death, by which one can go back to the highest supreme destination. And the highest supreme destination, the Lord says, is at His own abode. So Lord describes that the supreme abode of Him, of His, which is spiritual in nature, and that is considered to be the highest goal is to go back to the spiritual kingdom. So the Lord also describes different aspects of material creation. In the sense, he describes the time of Brahma, what is the nature of this material world, material planets. So the material existence come into being for a certain period of time, and then again it gets vanquished. And then the cycle of coming into existence, and then again a manifestation of this material world takes place in cycles. And this happens in the cycle of Brahma's time. So each day of Brahma, as soon as he goes to sleep, there is a certain portion of the world is annihilated. Then again it comes back when his day begins. Similarly, at the end of 100 years of Brahma, then there is a total devastation. So in this way, the material world is a continuous cycle of coming into existence and then again being annihilated. So all the living entities who are in this material existence, they also undergo this cycle. So when they are when the world is existing, they take different forms of bodies. So some take the form of some insects, some takes form of some other animal. So it is very important to recognize that there is one living force in all the living entities. And the characteristic of the living force is that there is a movement in the living force. Any living entity has the ability to move. The table or a chair or a glass, they do not have the ability to move. And the second symptom of a living force is that the living force has an ability to act. So activity is another symptom of living force. So based upon the living force, activity, and the living entity goes from one body to another and so on and so forth. So activity is a central fundamental symptom of a living force. And based upon the activity that a living entity does, he gets some reactions and chooses or goes to different destinations. So similarly, if the living entity is choosing certain kinds of activities, then that living entity remains in the material world. If the living entity chooses a different kinds of activities, then that living entity can go away from this material world into the paravyoma or the spiritual world. So how is that possible? That is already described by the Lord as how one has to remember him at the point of death. So without any other principle, without any other thought, if one is completely focused on the Lord at the time of death, then one can immediately go back to the spiritual world. But this is not that everyone can achieve very easily, and therefore there are different recommendations for different people as what they should do if they are not able to do this. So as we know, Bhagavad Gita is the essence of all the Vedic literature. So here you can see that Lord, when he is describing these various principles in Bhagavad Gita, he is also talking these things in with respect to the things that are already talked in the Vedas and things which are already talked in the Upanishads. And here we can see that's why Prabhupada in the very beginning, in the translation of this verse, is writing according to the Vedas. Why this word according to the Vedas is stated? Because the Lord here is using this word called Shasvate, the Vedas. So the Lord, when he is speaking, when he's summarizing, when he's giving instructions, he's also referring to the various instructions given in the Vedic literatures, and he's saying, what do they mean and what Arjuna is supposed to actually do. So here, we can see that the instructions in the Chandogya Upanishad, which is another famous Upanishad, one of the principal Upanishads. In that Upanishad, there is also a description of something known as 5 kinds of fire sacrifice. So it is said by doing these different kinds of sacrifice, one can go to different planetary systems. So especially the Vedas, they talk about the Karma Kanda section. And so basically all the Vedic literatures can be divided, the teachings can be divided into 3 sections. And one of them is Karma Kanda, the other is Jnana Kanda, and the third is Upasana Kanda. So largely the Upanishads, the Vedas that deal with large section of the Vedic literature deal with this idea of Karma Kanda. So basically what it means is that how when a living entity who is fully engrossed in sense gratification. So a living entity like an animal, when an animal by instincts, the living entity, the animal wants to enjoy the sense gratification, immediate gratification. There is an instinctive way of working for the animal. The animal cannot think of higher things. Just like even a simple mathematics, like 2 plus 2 equal to 4, is very difficult for an animal to understand because the animal thinking cannot go that far. So we can see that the animals are very much limited in their thinking. So their thinking is always about immediate eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. They cannot go beyond the scope of these 4 things and think, oh, there will be an earthquake that might come next year again. And we prepare ourselves better. No, they cannot think of these things. Earthquake came, went away, that's okay. We will continue with these 4 things. They cannot think anything beyond. They cannot think, oh, there is a recession, there is a cold, there is winter going to come. I mean, they're briefly aware, but even if they're aware of these things, they're only worried about how can I save some food for myself and my family and so on and so forth. But the humans, they think, how better can I act so that I can find better happiness? But in animalistic sense, the happiness is very instantaneous gratification. There is no higher understanding of pleasure. But humans, they can carefully think, oh, what activity if I do, I will increase my happiness. What kind of activity I should pay attention to? That's why you see people think, what is a long-term investment? People also think when they put money in different places, they also think, oh, this has a long-term benefit. I also want to invest something for the long-term benefit. So humans can think about this term called long-term benefit or higher returns. So this is what people can think. So when a crude human being who is very much like an animal into sense gratification, for him, the highest state of existence is that your life is not only in this material world, but there is also life after this world. For most people, life means this world, this life. So I enjoy my life to the fullest, and I don't care about what is going to happen next, because I have no conception that there is an idea of next life. And for most people, there is also no conception of karma. Karma means every action has got a consequence. Every action that I'm doing consciously and unconsciously has tremendous consequences on my life. And in fact, most common consequence of my activities are different kinds of suffering. But most people are not aware about the next life, they're not aware about the karma. So for those people, the Vedic literature say, wait, don't think you're independent. Don't think that you can do anything and everything and become happy. No, that kind of happiness is not the highest happiness. You must follow Karma Kanda principles. Karma Kanda principles means you act as prescribed by the Vedas, and then you get higher happiness in the heavenly planets. You work for yourself. You work for your own benefit, but you work in such a way that you not only get higher happiness in this life, you also get larger happiness in next life, the heavenly planets. So people who are grossly engrossed in material sense gratification, they move a step higher. They think, okay, I need to now pay attention to my future life. Just like you're all very conscious about, let us save some money when I become old or when I become little, my children will be grown up. So let me save some money. So people are thinking futuristic. They are thinking a little more carefully. But someone who's not very intelligent is not saving anything or is not taking into account what is to be done in the future. And then they're not in a safe condition. So usually people, that's why, are very careful. They also want happiness now. They also want happiness in the future. So they do a lot of savings. And they try to build some properties and so on and so forth, thinking that that will give me a better sense of happiness. So that is definitely better. In a rainy day, you always want a shelter. So in some sense, that is better. But again, these all things we have to look in a larger perspective. So the larger perspective is that although this is better than the animalistic way of living life, the problem with this is that all this cycle of going back to the heavenly planets or enjoying a higher sense of material life is also said to be temporary. So all these material planets, although one may go to a so-called higher planetary system where the experience of material happiness is higher and longer, yet it is temporary and not fully satisfying. So as long as one does punya karma, that is to act according to the instructions of the Vedas and be elevated to the higher planetary systems, one can experience a better sense of happiness, a better sense of life. But as soon as the punya account gets completed, one has to again come back to the material world. Again, one has to come to the earthly planet. So in this way, the living entity is going in a wheel, in a big giant wheel that we see in a circus. Sometimes he's in the top, sometimes again he comes back, and so on and so forth. So the real benefit that the living entity is actually acquiring, the so-called benefit, is also very temporary. So there are people who realize this. They see, oh, this is not so good. I'm just kind of rotating in a loop. That's not very good. So then people say, I need something higher than this. And it is for those people, there is something known as Jnanakanda, or the section of where people say, oh, this whole material existence has some problem. I want something else. I want to really analyze this material world and see there is always a problem here. Now, I want something else. Now, what is that something else? Then there's see what is temporary, what is permanent, what is truly existing and what is not truly existing. So in this way, they start analyzing. So this is the Jnanakanda section. So there is a lot of the philosophical speculation, philosophical inquiries done in order to understand the material world and the spiritual world. So there are a large section of people, as we see, Prabhupada also mentioned these two classes of people in this purport, in such a way those who are fruitive laborers, that is karma kanda followers, and philosophical speculators of the Jnanis. From time immemorial are constantly going and coming. So the karma kandis, they go up and down in the material existence. And these Jnanis, or the speculators, philosophical speculators, they recognize that this whole material existence is a problematic way of living life. And therefore, the better way to lead life is actually to reject everything material. Is the opposite extreme. So it's you completely rotate. Nothing to do with anything material. I don't want, I minimize everything. My senses, engagement of senses, I disassociate with this world, and I try to meditate on the impersonal form of the Supreme Absolute, the Brahman. So the Jnanis, they try to inquire different ways of finding to disassociate with the material world and to associate with the impersonal Brahman. So this is a step higher. So they are recognizing, okay, there is a problem, fundamental problem with the material existence, with any kind of material activities. So I stop all material activities. I do not engage my senses in anything which is material. I stay away from money. I stay away from all the material comforts. I lead a life of renunciation. I lead a life of sannyasa. I don't speak much. I don't do anything related to worldly affairs. I stay away from all these things and simultaneously pay attention on the Brahman. And it is by that means that I will find a state of happiness which is higher in the sense I do not have to struggle with this material happiness and distress. I will find a spiritual happiness but a happiness. Yes, can you go on mute? So, so the jnanis or the philosophical speculators, they recognize that this is not the way to lead our life, but rather the best way to lead life is to uh, so so they so they decide that okay, that this part of activities is all troublesome. So avoid activities and pay attention to the Brahman aspect of the absolute truth, and in this way I find happiness. So the Upanishads also very cryptically talk largely about the idea of the Brahman or the impersonal form of the Lord. But then a step higher than this is the yogis. So yogis recognize not only that there is this impersonal aspect of Brahman, which is the nature of the absolute, but there is also the supreme Lord, the Paramatma, the localized form of the Lord who is present in everyone's heart, and he is also the source of everything. And they slowly start meditating on the Paramatma picture of the Lord. So they recognize that I need to worship the Lord, I need to meditate on the Lord. So in this way, we can see there are different sections of the Vedic literatures which are trying to elevate people of different statuses to higher statuses. And in this way, the ultimate goal, as we know, we see is that everyone wants to minimize the suffering to the least possible extent, and in fact zero, and maximize the amount of happiness, the quality of happiness. So all these methods are one way of progression where one is trying to lead a better life. And all these things are mentioned in the Vedas. And therefore, sometimes when, especially in Bhagavad Gita, when the Lord is instructing, is also putting all these aspects which are mentioned in Vedas in perspective with what the Lord is saying. So the Lord is also putting in dialogue, but I'm not speaking this randomly. These are also mentioned in the Vedas. So in Chandogya Upanishad, it is also mentioned about what happens when one leaves the body at a specific point of time. And as we saw in the previous verses, these aspects of at what time one is dying. So as we saw in the few verses before, and how the motion of the planetary systems, how the position of the stars, how the duration of the time, they all influences, they have an influence on our life and also on our death. So these things are especially important for someone who is a karmakandi, who is a jnani, and who is a yogi. So according in the Vedas, there is more specific description about what happens to these people who pass at a certain time of the year, a certain time of the date, and so on and so forth. So what happens to them? So as we saw in the previous two verses, that one who passes in light, Shukla, and we saw there are a few more. Agni Jyotir Aha Shukla, Shanmasa Uttarayanam, Tatra Prayata Gachanti, Brahma Vido Janaha. So here it is mentioned, 2 verses before this, that one who passes in light. In fact, not only one who passes in the light, but one who knows Brahma Vido, one who knows Brahman, one who knows Brahman, and who passes during the Uttarayanam, that is, the sun is moving in the northern direction, and during the Shukla Paksha, and when in this period of time, when one leaves the body, then he gradually progresses the yogi, or the jnani who is leaving this body. He goes from to higher planetary systems and eventually to Brahmaloka, and then there, when he advances himself, he eventually goes back to spiritual world. So that is a step-by-step process for a yogi or a jnani who is dying at this time. Similarly, in the last verse we saw that a person who's leaving the body, Dhumo Ratri Satha Krishna, Shanmasa Dakshinayana. So those who are leaving the body in Dakshinayana when the sun is going southwards, or 6 months when the sun is moving southwards, and then during the night and the moonlight fortnight, then he reaches the moon planet and again comes back. The Lord is saying that this is also mentioned in the Vedas, these two methods of passing, leaving the body in darkness and in light. So, if one is a yogi or a jnani who has perfected the process of yoga and jnana, and then he is passing at this point of time, then one will reach to these kind of destinations, or he will come back from the destination. That is a description so far described. And in all these cases, one has to remember that although these things have been mentioned, they still have to become perfected in the process that they are following. That means we have to learn how to be the perfected yogi. That means there are 8 steps of an Astanga yogi, and the last is the stage of dhyana or samadhi, where he is constantly meditating on the form of the Lord who is within his heart. So one has to reach that state, and when one is a perfect yogi, he has the ability of deciding when he wants to leave his body, what time of the year, what time of the day he wants to leave his body. He has complete control. If one has not perfected, one is not able to decide when one wants to leave the body. He will be governed by the laws of material nature. So, again, in this process, there is a large amount of effort one has to put to reach to a state of perfection where one can leave his body in a specific state at a specific time, and then eventually reach spiritual world. Or if he's not able to do it at that specific time, he has to again come back to the spiritual world. So this is briefly what is mentioned. And lastly, it is importantly mentioned, Prabhupada, as we see, is giving a very, very short purport to these last couple of verses. And also, in his lecture, when Prabhupada gives in the early 1966, during actually, very in the beginning, Prabhupada actually was giving lectures on this series of verses. And eventually, this series of lectures were also condensed in the form of Beyond Birth and Death book. So Prabhupada, very briefly, just in a couple of sentences, speaks about all these verses together, actually. In one lecture, Prabhupada covers about 5-6 verses. The reason being, as we know, and as we will see in the next verse, that although Krishna is mentioning all these aspects of living at a specific time, not leaving the body at a specific time, the Lord says, this is not for you. For a devotee, all these things do not matter. For a devotee, this is not to be so much concerned about. And that the Lord will explain in the next verse. And therefore, Prabhupada also very briefly touches about this various aspects which are mentioned in the Vedas, and the Lord is describing about them. So Prabhupada also says why this is not so much of an importance for the devotees is because actually all these principles, although they exist in Vedas, they're not meant for the ultimate salvation. They're not meant for the ultimate supreme destiny. They are not meant for easily reaching the supreme destination. Why? Because, as we know, that Matta Parakaram Anyat Kinchit Asti Dhananjaya. The supreme absolute truth is not as what is understood by a yogi, nor by a jnani, but rather the supreme understanding of the truth, the supreme understanding of the ultimate truth is that the Lord Krishna himself, as a person, he has got a personality, and he is the supreme absolute truth. To understand this, and then to surrender unto him, Daiviyesha Gunamai Mamamaya Duratyaya. Mameva Prapadyante Maya Metam Taratate. So the Lord is saying that if you just surrender unto me, if you understand that I am the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and if one surrenders unto Him, so basically, Devi Yesha Gunamai Mamamaya Duratya, the living entity by nature has, as I mentioned about the living force, has these two qualities of being able to move and able to act. So the living entity also has got this characteristic of being eternal, being always uh, existing. But as soon as the living entity comes to this material existence, the living entity has a certain state of taking birth and a certain state of dying. So the living entity is not in a state of immortality. The living entity is not free from birth and death, which is unnatural to the actual characteristic of the living entity. Therefore, the living entity is not in its true state. So why? Because Devi is a Gunamai, Manumaya Dhyotya. Because the living entity is under the influence of another energy of the Lord, which is also very divine. The living entity, although has the nature of the Lord of being eternal, it does not have the ability to independently overcome the influence of the material energy. The living entity can only overcome the influence of the material energy in association of the Lord, in surrenderance to the Lord. So living entities, they are artificially proud. So especially when one thinks, oh, I've earned some money, I have some wealth, I have built some houses, I have some savings, I have my children to save me. And sometimes when they go, oh, what is this sannyasi? What is he doing here? He's asking for money, he's living with my donation, with my money. I'm supplying him everything. And he is still not respecting me. I'm the one who's taking care. Sometimes people think like this, oh, you know, I'm the source of everything. I'm the cause of things, of being happy. I can take care of things and so on and so forth. So this is said to be illusion. The living entity falling into this trap of thinking oneself to be supreme, thinking oneself to be the controller, is the influence of material energy on the living entity. So most people live in this false conception of being controller, being in charge, being proprietor. And in this way, in a wrong concept of life, people go on living because of the influence of the material energy. And as long as one is under the influence of illusion, material energy, driven by false ego, even by pride, one acts in various ways which are detrimental for one's own well-being. So basically, the material conception of life, driven by this false ego and the influence of material nature, the understanding is that by material adjustments, I will find happiness. Somewhere or other, I will pick material things to the maximum extent and find happiness. And therefore, we see people are trying different ways, increasing the quality of a car, of an iPhone, of a laptop, of the different kinds of comforts that people live materially. They want to extend it to the maximum. That is because of the false conception that this materialistic way of changing and making things improve will solve the problems of life. So another influence of the material nature is that one forgets that one is under the tight grips of laws of material nature. That is birth, death, old age, disease, janma, mrityu, jara, vyadhi, dukkha, dosha, anudarshana. One is not aware that one is tightly under the grips of these four things. One does not recognize that the one is under the tight grips of the time. The eternal time is taking away our duration of life every moment. So because of the material influence, we are forgetful of these things. This is not what I'm supposed to be. I'm not supposed to be under the grip of material laws. I'm not supposed to be under the grip of the material nature, the time factor. And yet, although it is causing suffering, even though a fruity person may think that, oh, I'm happy right now, I have lots of money, I have money in dollars, I can spend and build 10 houses in India or something like that. but he does not recognize that the factor of time will immediately take away my life at some point of time, very soon. And with that, all my houses, money, everything vanishes. So, what is the value of this? Where did I find the ultimate gain? So, one is not even aware of this. So, in this way, most people are under the influence of the material nature and unable to recognize that how should I come out of this? People don't want to recognize the problem, so where is the question of finding a solution? Therefore, it is said that one may try different means, but unless they do not surrender to Krishna, they actually do not get the highest benefit. The benefit of being freed from the influence of three modes of material nature. So the jnanis try for the same thing, to be liberated from the three modes of material nature. The yogis try for the similar thing. The devotees also get that, but for them, this aspect of being free from three modes of material nature is a byproduct. It's a very natural outcome of the devotional service. For devotional service is considered to be higher than liberation because liberation is just so easily obtained for a devotee. Furthermore, the devotional service, which a devotee when understands and surrenders to the Supreme Lord and renders devotional service, then he becomes eligible to receive and eventually qualified by perfecting devotional service to obtain love of Krishna, the Krishna Prema. So the love for the Supreme Personality of God is awakened in one's heart. So it is very important to recognize that wherever there is Krishna, so Maya Mukta Jiva, Mahesh Pada Krishna Jnana. So a living entity who is influenced by the Maya or the material nature has forgotten the knowledge of Krishna. And because one has forgotten about Krishna, the Maya is putting him in its grips. But as soon as the living entity recognizes the presence of Krishna, recognizes oneself to be a servant of Krishna, and engages in Krishna, immediately the influence of material nature is vanquished. So while for this to be attained, it takes so much time for jnanis and so much austerities and sacrifice for yogis and jnanis, it is very easily obtainable for the devotees. Simply by surrendering to the Lord and recognizing that I cannot come out of this influence of material nature, which is insurmountable. Because I myself am a tiny living entity. Only by the mercy of the Lord, mercy of the spiritual master, I can be freed from this. And when I'm freed from this, then I don't have to be worried about any of these things. At what time am I going to leave my body? Where am I going to leave my body? No, that is not required to worry. Why? Because the Lord says in the very beginning of the chapter, where He says, if you simply remember me, Antakale cha bhav eva smaran muktva kalevara. Ya prayati samadbhav ya pinasti atra samshaya. And whoever at the time of death puts his body remembering me alone, at once attains my nature, of this there is no doubt. So, what is the most essential element? The most essential element is for a devotee, he doesn't have to worry where he's going to die, what time he's going to die. Only worry is Antakale cha mameva smaran muktva kalevara. Is am I remembering the Lord? Am I practicing how to remember the Lord? Am I learning how to be engaged constantly in the devotional service? So without any motivation, without any other fruitive or speculative way of functioning, am I just sincerely serving Guru and Krishna? If one is able to engage in that way, immediately one is freed from the modes of material nature. Immediately the liberation that is asked for by the Mayavadis is just like that. It's just obtained so easily. But as further one progresses in devotional service, one can experience the love of Krishna, the reciprocation of the Lord. So that remembrance of the Lord is a process of practice, is a process of constant engagement that we have to learn ourselves. So a devotee is only worried, how can I improve my devotional service to the Lord? How can the devotional service be freed from the fruitive activity? So even the devotional service, although it's pure in nature, the living entity in its impure state also contaminates the devotional service with a fruitive tendency. I do this for the Lord so that I get something in the return. I do not want to surrender fully to the Lord and speculate something and do something for the Lord. No, we have to simply follow the instructions of the higher authorities, the spiritual master, and work accordingly. Then we are in complete surrender. Then our activities, as we were discussing, the living force, the symptom is activity. So there is no way we can be free from activity, but if we learn how to act in surrender, then there is all auspiciousness. Then one can attain the highest salvation. Otherwise, even salvation which is attained, the moksha attained by the jnanis, they go only up to the place of Brahman effulgence. But because in the Brahman effulgence, there is no variegatedness in transcendental happiness, you have to again come back to the material world because the soul is only satisfied in the spiritual abode of Lord Krishna, the Vaikuntha planets of the Golok Vrindavana, where there is variegated spiritual happiness. And it is in that space that the living entity, which is eternal in nature, experiences eternal spiritual happiness of different varieties or different kinds, which actually is the ultimate salvation. Not the salvation as taught by the Mayavadis to just be freed from the material world and go to the Brahman. No, one has to go to the Vaikuntha planets or the abode of the Lord Krishna. And the entire Bhagavad Gita is a means, in a step-by-step progression to help one recognize, to become a surrendered devotee of the Lord. And Prabhupada, being very merciful, is always explaining that as the most essential element of understanding Bhagavad Gita is to surrender to Krishna, is to give up speculations, to give up the fruitive tendencies. And as we know, throughout this chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada again and again mentions that to remember Krishna, the easiest way is recommended by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The instructions of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu are the practical demonstration of the instructions of Bhagavad Gita. Because it is difficult for us to even understand the Bhagavad Gita, and even more, it is difficult to apply them in our practical lives. We all live in a different age. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, okay, I will simplify all of these things for you and give you the essence of everything. That is to chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Simply by doing this, what will happen? One will learn to remember the Lord. Simply by chanting and hearing is the way of living a surrendered life. So simply by doing that, and furthermore, there is a qualification to this process. That is, one has to do this in the mode of humility, tolerance, and respect. So anyone who has got this qualification of being very humble, servant of the servant, dasa, dasa, and dasa, not trying to become master in this world. Everyone wants to become master. But the Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is very pleased when one sees one to be the servant of the servant of the servant. That is a very great quality. And even Srila Prabhupada, when again and again, Prabhupada says, no, I'm your servant. I'm servant of the servant of the servant. And I'm accepting this role of the spiritual master because as a servant of my spiritual master. And so basically, the mood of a pure devotee is to be a servant of the servant. That is the principle of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Sometimes, even in devotional service, sometimes someone thinks I will become servant of the Supreme Lord directly. I have no connection with anyone. No. Devotional life means in association of devotees. That means I have also a relationship with other devotees. And what is that relationship? I also become a servant of the other servants. So, because in the spiritual world, we also have to exist, the living entities all exist together. And they can exist together because they have this attitude of service. And they are only considering the Lord as their master. And in this mood of surrender, the Lord is very pleased. Oh, He's not only surrendered to me, he's not only a servant of me, but he's also a servant of the spiritual master and of the devotees. He's working in a mode of humility and tolerance and respect that immediately attracts the attention of the Lord. And as it is said, the kingdom of the God is the meek and humble. So the more we become surrendered, meek and humble, we see more the protection of the Lord. The word that is used in Bhagavad and Chaitanya Charitamrita is Akinchana, one who is free from all material possessions. So sometimes people have these material possessions and wealth, property, and so on and so forth. Few people have some other kinds of material subtle uh, distinct designations of I'm something and something else, and so on and so forth, and superior and that, so on and so forth. So there are different kinds of possessions that we possess. As long as we have different possessions of different material kinds, either gross or subtle, they do not allow us to surrender fully to the Lord. So as we become akinchana, is free from material possessions, unwanted designations, and unwanted um, material things, and engage them in the service of the Lord, then it is through that we attain the ultimate perfection. And that we will see in the coming verses. Lord will explain how a devotee leaves the planet, or how he leaves his body, and how that is different from the way others have to worry about these things. I'll stop here and see if there are any questions or comments. Okay. If there are no questions or comments, we'll stop here.